Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Genre Guys. I am joined by the inestimable Lou Wasserman's Ghost and Lorn. Here today, we are going to be talking about a pretty darn good movie, I have to say. This film, you might have heard of it, and bear with me as I pull it up, is The Sting, starring Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and Robert Shaw. And what would you call this genre, gentlemen? Would you say this is something along the lines of, gosh, I don't know, pre-Ocean's 11? Is that heretical for me to say that?
Well, it's the con artist caper film, I think you'd call it. And it's not just Ocean's 11 that we can think of lots of things that came after. Catch Me If You Can, in a way, American Hustle, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels in a different way, House of Games by Mamet, certainly. The Spanish Prisoner, also by Mamet. And you're right in that I was thinking Ocean's 11, as George Clooney and the gang did it, was one of those. The original Ocean's 11 was strictly a caper robbery movie.
Yeah, and predates The Sting, by the way. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Yes. And then, of course, the other one that was referred to in a lot of things I looked up about this was that audiences were into this because of Mission Impossible. Because about 90% of the plots on Mission Impossible, with all the disguises and the stuff, was they won by being cleverer than the other guy more than by violently overthrowing them.
Interesting.
I mean, I hadn't made that connection until I read that, and then I thought, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, guys, I got to say, if you look at the photo that I've pulled up, tell me that does not look like Brad Pitt, and possibly, if you squint your eyes, a bit George Clooney there. I got to say, I was... Yeah, you're both probably going to beat me up when I say this, but this was my first time watching The Sting. I hadn't watched it before, and I was mesmerized. And watching again, it's like one of those feelings of deja vu where you go through it and you think, "Oh man, I see where so many things. I can see where so many of the movies that have come out in the last little while have come from and originated from this film." It felt like one of those prototypical films, and I really didn't realize, my experience with Robert Redford has always been that he's a bit of an older gentleman and whatnot. I mean, and of course, you had him in Captain America Part 2, but here he's called as the kid. I didn't know he looks like Brad Pitt's dad. It's crazy.
Speaking of dads, do you know whose dad is in this movie?
Yes. Lorn, you want to tell us?
Well,
yeah.
When you watch the opening where Luther, the black con man who's partners with him, gets killed by the bad guys, do you know who Luther is?
I do. Do you? You guys know, right? Okay,
that's Robert Earl Jones, and as the name might imply, that's James Earl Jones. Darth, I am your father.
And that was the very first thing when I heard him speak. I'm like, wow, he sounds like
that resonant
Vader.
Voice. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't know that James Earl Jones' dad was an actor. That's news to me.
Oh yeah, that's him.
Robert Earl Jones, right here. Look at that. And you can hear it, like James inherited his father's voice like 100%. Like, wow. Really impressive.
And there's all kinds of fun stuff like that in this movie that it's funny when you mention
stellar cast.
Well, but when you mentioned seeing it, they re-released it. Originally, as I think I mentioned to you, we're coming up on its 50th anniversary. It came out Christmas Day of 1973. But they re-released it in 1977. And what's interesting is what the official ad tagline was. It was, "Remember the movie that made you feel so good? Well, here it is again." It was speaking to people saying, if you don't feel so good, if times are getting you down, here's your chance. And a re-release not that many years after the original, and it opened at the Radio City Music Hall, for God's sake. So they really knew they were going to get a big crowd for the re-release because, of course, there wasn't home video in those days either, the way it is now.
Well, the other thing that struck me about the movie, though, was I don't know if you recall, shortly after The Last Jedi came out, Rian Johnson had posted something on Twitter saying he doesn't like to go see movies on opening night. He likes to wait for 3 weeks until the mood is just right. And he posted this picture that I'm just pulling up here. I hadn't realized it was from The Sting, but yeah, that kind of stuck with me. I don't know if that's an association that you really want to make. But okay, well, enough about that. For those of us who are listening and who have not watched The Sting, basically, as a summation of it, it's a film that's set in, what would you say, like the 1930s or so?
Yeah.
1936.
1936, and it follows Johnny Hooker, who's played by Robert Redford, and he teams up with Henry Gondorff, who's played by Paul Newman, and the same guy on your salad dressing, and that guy was an actor before, apparently. And they decide to take revenge on the ruthless crime boss responsible for killing James Earl Jones's father, and that crime boss is by the name of Doyle Lonigan, and he's played by Robert Shaw. So they basically come out with this, what can only be described as an elaborate con. And it's one where you've got multiple levels of inception going on in terms of you think something is happening in real life, but you realize afterwards that it's actually sort of planned. And it keeps
the fun of that is you're enjoying watching them fool the bad guy, not realizing you're being fooled too
at the same time.
So you're playing both sides of the con as an audience,
and it's kind of peeling. It's kind of like peeling back an onion continuously, because you've got con within con within con, and I guess again with my heresy, the best thing that I can attribute it, or at least the movie that comes to mind that reminds me of it so much now is, of course, Ocean's 11, from which I can now see how much influence, how much inspiration it took from this movie, The Sting.
Well, let's be sure to say the new Ocean's 11. My standard line when people ask me to compare it to the original, I said Clooney and company are acting cool. Frank and Sammy and Dean were cool.
That's right.
There's a big difference.
There is. And
but the other casting thing, originally it was supposed to be Paladin as Doyle Lonigan.
Daniel Boone, or no, not Daniel.
Richard Boone.
Richard Boone.
And supposedly they were talking with him, and for some reason he stopped answering their phone calls, and so they got Robert Shaw, who's great. And some people say that Robert Shaw got screwed out of a Best Supporting nomination because his name is up there above the titles with Redford and Newman. And the other little curious little thing is he walks with a limp in the whole movie. Apparently he hurt his ankle just before they started shooting, playing racquetball, and they said, keep it in. So he kept it in for the next several months of shooting.
So it was method acting then. Well, the other thing that was interesting is that it reunites Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Yes.
I think this is the superior movie, though.
Oh, by far. Yeah. And it was a huge hit. Yeah. Folks, we talk a lot on this channel in general about box office. You're looking at a movie that was made for, I forget, it was about 7, 8, 12, and it made $165 million at the box office, which is the equivalent of about 800 and some odd million today. So obviously it wasn't a 2023 Walt Disney movie.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things I want to bring up about this, because I've got some really personal connections to this movie. It's why I wanted to talk about it.
No kidding.
This is one of the movies that my dad and I watched when I was younger. And I remember when I watched it that it completely blew my mind. My mind exploded at the way that the movie ended, and that was what really got me hooked on heist-style movies. And so when I first began dating my ex, a lot of what bonded us was movies. And we were talking about movies and important movies to us, and I happened to mention The Sting, and she said that she had never seen it before. And so I told her, we're going to fix that tonight. And the very first time that I went over to her place to watch movies together, it was The Sting that I brought with me. She needed to see that movie. And so what was fun for me about preparing for this one is that I got to watch this movie with my son today
Oh,
for the first time. He'd never seen it before,
Oh,
and I wasn't sure how he was going to take it because he's 14, and this is an old timey movie. I wasn't sure what he would think. He's all about music though, and this movie reintroduced Scott Joplin's music to a whole new audience. And so as soon as he started hearing the music, he started leaning in and paying attention. And so there were a couple of times during the movie where I had to pause it to kind of explain things, to explain how the cons were being set up and what they were talking about, some of the lingo, stuff like that. But 30 minutes into the movie or so, he turned to me and he said, "This is a really good movie. I like it."
uh-huh.
And
Nice.
then we got to the end of it, and I got to watch his head explode.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "What? What? What did I just watch?" And then he told me, he asked me, "Are you done with your Christmas shopping yet?" And I said, "Why? What do you have in mind?" And he says, "I want this movie on Blu-ray." So,
They
without
just brought
getting
out
into
a 4K super duper version for the
Yeah,
anniversary.
I saw
Wait,
that. Sorry, go on.
without getting into the full spoiler part of the talk yet, if you have not seen this movie, don't watch the rest of this
Yeah.
right now. Go see it. Don't
Yeah.
let it be ruined for you.
And
This movie is worth your time.
speaking of the music, of course, you have to remember it's totally the wrong time period, but it works. Scott Joplin, who Marvin Hamlish adapted for this, his songs are all turn of the century, and Hamlish knew it, and not 1936. And
Yeah.
by the way, Hamlish did something that only one other person in the history of the Oscars has done. He won 3 Oscars the same night at the Oscars of 1973. He won 2 of them for the movie The Way We Were, one for original dramatic score and one for best original song, but then he won for The Sting for best score or adaptation. And you might ask, who was the person who won 3 in a night other than him? Billy Wilder.
Wow.
For The Apartment, he won Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay in conjunction with I.A.L. Diamond, his collaborator. So that's kind of a rare and wonderful little piece of movie trivia. But the music, of course, is a huge part of the movie, as are those wonderful illustrations that separate the chapters of the story,
Oh yeah.
which are kind of pseudo Saturday Evening Post cover art.
It's also doing something that I miss in movies from these various periods. George used a lot of them, is the wipes and the dissolves and the
Yeah.
shrinking
Yeah.
circle. Those
Yeah,
those
yeah.
all kind of place you in a certain era, and it's kind of a fun thing that's in the movie.
It was it was very immersive. It was really fascinating. I loved watching all the little details. And I think in some ways it also made my head explode a bit when I watched it too. So audience listening to this and you haven't seen it, stop right now, go and see it. We'll be here waiting.
Well,
all right,
we may
promise.
not necessarily spoil that big spoiler, so
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll let you know if that's happening, and then you can just sort of go put your fingers in your ears and go neener, neener, neener during that portion. But by the way, it got 10 Oscar nominations and won 7 of them.
That's incredible.
Best Picture, Best Director, Best Editing, Best Original Screenplay, and it is now still the 21st most successful film of all time.
Wow.
Not including the re-release, not including the home video. So there you go. The audience spoke.
So for
Yeah,
this
yeah.
so for this type of genre then, what would you say would be, so we've got this movie, we got The Sting, we talked about Ocean's 11. What would you say would be a couple of other films that could maybe hold a candle to this one in that genre?
I think the 2 Mammoth ones, House of Games and Spanish Prisoner, although they're
Yeah.
certainly contemporary and not in that style of old-timey movie, but they have the twists and they have the deceptions and they fool along with you as you go. I would
Right.
say Ocean's 11, you're always in on what they're doing,
Right.
as opposed to where this fooling even you.
Yeah.
But then you can look at some of the things that are sort of peripherally that kind of movie. Whatchamacallit, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is a con
Yeah.
game movie. Now You See Me is a con game movie. The Lady Killers is a con game movie. And remember, folks, real con. Oh, Catch Me If You Can.
Oh yeah, Catch Me If You Can.
American Hustle.
Yeah.
Paper Moon. He's a con man. He's selling Bibles. And by the way, we can give a tip of the hat to the late great who just passed away. Ryan O'Neal, who's Anyway, but
What about The Usual Suspects?
sure. Although it's really conning you more than anything else.
Right.
The most dangerous thing in the world's greatest trick was making you think he didn't exist. Wasn't that the tagline?
Yeah, that was it for sure.
And then we could talk about all the other great people in this: Charles Durning and Harold Gould and Ray Walston. And by the way, a little tip of the hat, because you might think, oh God, are they crazy? The Sting 2 came out 10 years later.
Yeah.
And you know what? It ain't that terrible. It's weird to have Jackie Gleason in the Paul Newman part and Mac Davis in the Robert Redford part, and Oliver Reed as Lonigan this time, and Carl Malden is an even worse bad guy. But you know what? It ain't terrible. It really ain't. And
Really?
they tried for that. I was pleasantly surprised, because they bring their own style and charm to it. By the way, I understand there actually were a pair of famous con men back in the day whose last name was Gondorf. Neither of them were these characters, but still.
No kidding.
Yeah. So they got that right.
I want to throw a dark horse candidate out there, which is not a heist movie, but it has a similar style of mind-blowing twist, and that's Fight Club.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not really not a con, is it?
No, it's not a con, but it does a similar thing with the storytelling. Or you could also say something like, now I can't think of the title of the movie, the Bruce Willis movie where he sees dead people.
Oh, yeah.
Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense, yes. It does a similar thing where at the climax of the movie, it reframes the entire movie for the audience so that you understand that what you just watched is not what you thought you just watched.
and it just goes to show you, people like to be fooled.
Yeah.
Which is part of how con men, of course, actually make their way.
Well,
I've always told people the strongest thing a real con man, has going for him is people's self-respect and arrogance, because they think, I'm too smart to be fooled.
I'm going to disagree with you, Lou. It's
Okay.
not that people like to be fooled. It's that they like to be let in on the secret.
Well,
and the other
okay.
thing is, if the con man is going to sucker you in, what he has to do is make you feel good about giving you his money.
Well, I can't think who I was reading up, but they talked about how they would go to a racetrack, the con men, and they would get 9 different guys to each pick a different winner, because there's only 9 horses in a race or thereabouts. And they would give each of them a tip, and so one of them had to win. And then that's the guy that you take a bigger bet on the next race, which you're conning him on. So you have to give people a feeling that they're in on the deal, and they're in on the secret, and they're ahead of the game before you pull the rug out from under them.
Do you remember the movie Leap of Faith?
Yes.
Yeah, that's another one that kind of is in a similar kind of place where you have a con man, although this is a redemption arc movie.
Yes.
It's not one where there's a heist, but it's similar
Right.
kind of a thing.
And it's a great movie, and people who haven't seen that should see it too, by the way.
So okay, now I'm gonna ask, what did you guys like? So you guys are obviously both big fans of the Sting, and I am now too, as of this point. So for each of you, what would you say is the highlight and the low light of the movie? And I know that's a bit of a tricky one, because this movie really doesn't have that many low lights, but I'd be curious to hear.
I couldn't pick a low light, but I think as a highlight, you have to call out the cast. Paul Newman and Robert Redford have incredible chemistry, and there's a giant cast in this that Lou already mentioned a whole lot of them, but they're all having an awful lot of fun, and I think they're at the top of their game, and I think they just enjoyed making this movie, and it all shows.
And I have said, when you see a movie that isn't working, me, as somebody who's made movies, my first thought is, this was no fun. Every day
Yeah.
this was work, not fun. This was a bad day at the office for everybody from the key grip to the best boy to the craft service guy. This movie, on the other hand, everybody was having a lot of fun, even when it was long hours and even when it was hard, because what they were doing enchanted them. And by the way, when you talk about the pair of them, the movie that was made after this, they said, hey, we got the same period, all those brown hues. We got Redford. We got George Roy Hill. We're going to make this fantastic movie about barnstorming pilots called The Great Waldo Pepper. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And it just goes to show you, if you don't put the ingredients together the right way, it doesn't matter how strong any one of them is or any two of them are, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I think is a positive about this movie is that if you're not familiar with some of these artists' work, it's like you're not going to go wrong seeing movies with Paul Newman. And it's like Paul Newman's a personal favorite of mine. There are so many that you can pick from. Robert Redford, Charles Durning. These guys did not turn in bad performances. And
Nope.
so you want to look up any of those guys' filmographies, you're going to find something you'll like.
But I understand, though, that when this thing came out, Paul Newman was apparently in a bit of a rut in terms of his films, though, wasn't he?
He'd made 4 or 5 movies that had failed terribly before this.
Right.
I'm trying to think of which they were. But he made several losers before this. This kind of revitalized his career in a way because you can be popular and still not have your movies make money for various reasons, as we've certainly seen. I'm trying to think. Well, anyway, it's. I think the highlight is when they admit their humanity. You know, that great line from this movie is where they look at the bad guy and Redford says he's not as tough as he thinks he is, and Newman says neither are we. That's killer. That is just killer.
There's another one, and this I think is part of the reason that the movie is enchanting, is that all of these guys are con men. They're all bad guys of one sort or another, but they're all banding in on this to hit the guy who hit Luther. They're doing it because it was one of their own. And there's a moment where Redford he's frustrated. He wants to go straight for Lonigan, and he's talking to Gondorf and trying to convince him why he wants to do this. And he's impatient. And Gondorf's asking him pretty much, why are you pushing so hard? And he says, because if I can't take him, I'm going to have to kill him. And I don't know how to kill him.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great line too.
And the other thing about the movie that just occurred to me mentioning that, they're technically crooks and bad guys too, but they're Robin Hood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Literally.
The corrupt rich.
Yeah, exactly. I found the movies that died for Newman before this were WUSA, Pocket Money, and The Macintosh Man. So movies none of you have ever heard of out there and probably will never hear of again.
Yeah, I was going to say, none of those ring a bell.
With 3 in a row, you're in, dare we say it, Rachel Zegler territory without the smart mouth for losers. Anyway, and, the other great thing, because of this movie, one of the absolute highlights, in spite of all the other things with special effects on the Universal tour, is that corner, that office up above where they watch. They've got the spotter up there telling them when he's coming. That round turret sort of building on the second floor, to the point where they copied it exactly when they built the one in Orlando. Because the tram would literally slow down for people to take pictures of that, because everybody knew that movie and was so into it. And that's just one of the buildings on the back lot that they chose for this film.
And that's it. They had to basically recreate all this on a back lot, right, for the filming.
Well, I mean, the one thing that isn't on the back lot that's kind of fun, because in a funny way, matte painting stuff as opposed to CGI is the period, is the carousel. That carousel, you can go ride it today. It's at the pier in Santa Monica. And when you see the city of Chicago out there behind it, that's all a glass shot. That's all a matte glass shot. That carousel, I've been on it many times. It's right there at the pier at the end of it's right there where those of you who've ever traveled Interstate 10 anywhere in the country, Interstate 10 begins right next to that carousel at the beach, at the Pacific Ocean, and ends in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Atlantic Ocean. And there are two signs, one at each end, that tell you nowhere else that is officially the Christopher Columbus Transcontinental Highway. So go figure. But yeah, it's there. That's 5 minutes from where I was born at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. So anyway, but all of that skyline is matte work.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous. And I think we also need to talk about the period recreation of Chicago, just because they got the storefronts, the signage, the clothes that everybody is wearing.
Buses?
The cars, too.
Yeah.
It just really, really does transport you there.
When I read that, when I watched the movie, I didn't know when it had been filmed. I thought it was a much older film than it really is. They were really able to transport you back to the 1930s.
And by the way, the diner set where they have the thing in the diner in the movie, that's the same diner as Back to the Future where Marty McFly and his father get together. Also on the Universal back
familiar.
lot. Yeah.
And may I also just say that this movie was... Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, the only thing they really did on location was the train station. So everything else was either around L.A. or on the back lot.
And did Robert Redford do his own stunts there? I wonder.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. I didn't see any that looked like they had obscured face shots. But I, at the same time, I wasn't really looking for it, so I can't say for sure. But he was young and spry at that time, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did.
Unfortunately or fortunately, it's not about young and spry. It's about what the insurance company will let you do. Because if you get hurt and shut the picture down for 3 weeks while they wait for you to get better, it costs everybody a lot of money. So sometimes people want to do it, but they won't let them. So
unless you're Tom Cruise.
Well,
unless you're Tom Cruise, yeah.
He's self-insured.
I would say for me, one of the high points was, and I don't know if I want to go into spoiler territory here, but the almost last minute romance of Robert Redford and the diner lady, and how that ended up happening, how that ended up resolving. Let's put it that way. I didn't see that come. I was just like, what? So that was really well done. Just all the interactions too, like Paul Newman, especially when he was playing poker at the beginning of the film in the train against Lonergan, kind of setting everything up. You really have no idea where this is all going, right? And then I'm watching this and I'm like, why are they setting up? What are they doing here? And then it sort of all clicks together, and you think, oh my god! And the elaborate nature of the grift, as they say, it was really something else. Basically having these guys walk into what is essentially like a Hollywood stage production without them even knowing it. Really, really fantastic, I thought. In terms of low points, I would just simply say I felt that there was the green screen that they used whenever they were driving or on the train was a bit too obvious. But that would literally be the only complaint.
In a way, that takes you back to that period of film, too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, maybe they could have done it better if they wanted to. I don't know, but they might have done it that way just to give a little tip of the hat to that era. Certainly the lighting and the style of the filmmaking was very much that era, even though those movies were black and white, and this obviously was not. Mm-hmm. But in a way, it was sepia tone. Everything in this movie is brown in one way or another. Brown or maroon. You're
right. Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever seen some of these old silents where they hand tinted, all the night scenes blue and stuff. So color existed in black and white existed in color, is all I can say.
Right. Well, it was. This was a really, really fun film, and so, what was there anything else after this that Redford did that really kind of lived up to this, you think? Or
I don't know of lived up to, but if you want to see somewhat of a spiritual successor, there's Sneakers. And that's got James Earl Jones too.
Yeah. I forgot about that movie. But I thought you were going to say The Sting Part 2, Lorn.
Well, but Redford's not in it.
Yeah, I
And
know.
I haven't seen that one, to be honest. I haven't
It's
seen
really
part two.
kind of fun because Jackie Gleason is always fun to watch. And also, by the way, speaking of LA locations, if you see The Sting Part 2, there's a big scene in a nightclub. That is actually a men's haberdasher store from the 1920s called Oviat's that actually got, after that movie, turned into a restaurant and nightclub in downtown LA. And it's one of the great sets that you didn't have to do anything to in the history of the movies. Very worth watching, even just to see that. And Terry Garr is fun in it too.
So,
Because you brought up Jackie Gleason, and because Paul Newman is a lead in this one, I do want to bring up.
The Hustler.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, sure.
yeah. Just as a side note, if you guys like this movie, you like Paul Newman, go watch that one.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, Lou, something that sort of going back to something that you were saying though, as we've been talking, I've been digging around a little bit more on the Sting, and there's a piece of trivia that I think really kind of speaks to what you both have been mentioning, is that apparently the director, although the movie was set in 1936, the director didn't want to make a movie that felt like the 1930s. He wanted to make a movie that felt like a movie that was made in the 1930s.
There you go. There you go. It's dealing with a real time period, but it's dealing with the culture of that period, not the reality.
So
Because-
apparently Hill watched a lot of films from that era and tried to mimic them as much as possible. And so one of the examples they give is that he didn't use any extras because he noticed how few extras were in
Yes.
30 crime movies.
On the street.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you'd have 50 people walking down the street. In this movie, no. And in those days, no, because they didn't have the money. I mean, they, you know, I don't know if people realize that in those great gangster movies made in the 30s at Warner Brothers, you know, the Bogart movies and the Edward G. Robinson movies and all of those, when you see machine guns, you know, when the bootleggers are shooting it out, those are real.
No way.
They didn't have squibs. They had guys who were really good marksmen with Tommy guns.
Really?
Yes, really.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, really. It was a different time. And you talk about doing stunts. What about running and having a stream of bullet holes chasing you down the street?
Literally.
Yeah, a lot of rehearsal. A lot of rehearsal.
How are the insurance premiums back then?
What insurance premiums?
I'm kidding.
What insurance premiums? But I mean, and they were cranking them out, remember, because in those days everybody was on salary week to week, and you finished a movie on Tuesday and started another one on Wednesday. So anyway,
Holy
but
cow.
yeah, that era was a different time, gang. And you know, here's an interesting thing. One of the things I found looking up this movie was a guy writing about it, and he says how he rates movies is the how will it or does it hold up.
Yeah.
And this movie holds up, as you've just pointed out. And he said, here's what he says. This is a guy, let's see, what's his name? Give him credit. Roger Moore on a thing called Movie Nation. I know nothing about him except it came up when I searched for Sting stuff, okay?
And he was a 00 agent.
Oh, yeah, right. But he says nobody's talking up The English Patient today, and Crash wasn't the only Oscar winner that the Academy and those who love movies wish they could take back. Is anybody tracking down The Artist these days, or The Shape of Water, Moonlight, Parasite, Nomadland, Coded, a rewatch for pleasure and edification? Is Everything Everywhere All at Once destined to have an afterlife to hold up? Maybe, but not the way The Sting has. I'll take that bet all day long.
Yeah. That is very much on point.
Yep.
Crash, Jesus, I forgot about that film.
And also he points out that most Oscar winners are not feel-good movies, are not upbeat. Schindler's List, 12 Years a Slave, you know, I mean... But again, when
artsy,
after those ones, there's something wrong with you.
well, yeah.
Artsy and emotionally draining.
Yes, yes.
Right,
And this is up, well, like I say, when they did the re-release, the tagline was, remember how good you felt when you saw this? You can feel that way again. And by the way, 10 years later, we were in the middle of Watergate, and we were in the middle of the end of the Vietnam War. There wasn't a lot of upbeat stuff going on in the world, so they knew what they were doing.
Wow. Well, it's really a standout film, and it's kind of like, as you guys have said, it's kind of made me hungry to go watch some more. Yeah, this might be a bit of a rabbit hole I'm going to fall into now, thanks to you guys.
Well, it's one of those that I think it's fascinating to me. I wasn't sure how my son was going to take this movie. I wasn't sure if he was going to just humor me by sitting on the couch or if he would actually get into it. And I was quite surprised when he was literally jumping off the couch at the end. And that tells me this is a good movie. It doesn't matter what period it is. It doesn't matter how old it is. What matters is, are you invested in the characters, and did the movie make you feel something? And this one does, if you give it a chance.
Yes. It follows. I think I've mentioned it before here, but I know I have elsewhere. The National Lampoon did a wonderful thing called the Suddenly Everyone's Run Over by a Truck School of Dramatic Criticism. And they said it is, if you turn the page, if you cut to the next scene, if you go to the next episode, and it says suddenly everyone was run over by a truck. Do you give a damn? This movie passes that test. A lot of them do not. And by the way, we have been stressing all over the channels here that a lot of people think physical media is going to go away. So if you are like me, somebody who treasures a collection of stuff you own as opposed to something they can turn off at the other end,
Yeah.
here's a movie to go out and buy the disc of. Here
Oh,
is one
yeah.
that because you can watch it every year or two or five and have equally fun, and then of course showing it to your kids and your grandkids is fun too.
It's no. I will be going out on Amazon and looking for that 4K Blu-ray that I saw pop up in the search results earlier. No, this is very, very highly recommended. Was it Lauren? You're the one who recommended it, right? Thank you very much. This was fantastic.
Yeah, this is an important movie to me personally, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up. Also, I'm hoping maybe it leads us into talking a bit more about some other Paul Newman movies. I'd like to talk about the Hustler, Cat on the Hot Tin Roof.
HUD?
Yeah,
HUD?
oh yeah.
It's so good. Oh, God. And by the way, this is the only Oscar Best Actor nomination Redford ever got.
Yeah, I saw that.
So,
and he's still cranking them out too. That's an actor who's still working.
Yeah. But
so who would you say? Sorry.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, between Paul Newman and Robert Redford, who would you say was bigger or the biggest in their heyday?
Newman.
Newman, eh?
Yeah, I think so too.
He's
got a twinkle in his eye.
Newman did something that very few people do. The other great standout who did it was John Wayne. He went from being the young romantic lead to being the older mentor seamlessly, and therefore prolonged his career. Wayne did it in a movie called The Comancheros, which I will very much recommend to everybody. And Lee Marvin's in that too, and Nehemiah Persoff. And anyway, to make that transition from the guy with his shirt off that the girls are all going crazy for, to the older but wiser guy. And you mentioned The Hustler. What about the later? What was it called? The Color of Money.
The Color of Money, yep.
which was him taking basically the mentor part to Cruise, right?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, it was a total second act appearance, and then you had him appear in things like Blaze. You remember Blaze?
Yeah.
He started playing those older crotchety roles, and
Slapshot.
You even want to go to Cars, where he's playing the old car.
Yeah.
Just a revolutionary career.
And he makes one hell of a good Caesar salad dressing, by the way.
I was gonna say, yeah, I see him.
If you haven't had the creamy Caesar from Newman's Own, get some. It's good stuff.
That's part of the reason that I like that we're doing these series, is that to a whole generation of people, Paul Newman's the salad dressing guy. They don't know that he was an actor. So that's why I want to talk about some of these old
That's the old, when people talk about Wings, and then somebody mentioned the Beatles, they say, oh, that was Paul's other band.
No.
Oh yes, it happens out there, or did happen.
I refuse to believe that.
Oh yeah. Well, everything that isn't the last 10 minutes is irrelevant to a lot of people nowadays, and I have to hope that after when the level of contemporary arts gets as low as it's gotten, that people will start seeking out entertainment for its own sake and happily discover classical things like this. And remember, this is a movie from 1973. It's not from the 30s and the 40s. It's not
Yeah.
Gone with the Wind. It's not Casablanca, which, by the way, Lauren, I have the same experience that you had with this with Casablanca. My wife was an Air Force brat and grew up all over Europe, which means she didn't have Channel 9 running all the old movies every night. And I showed her Casablanca for the first time in her life about 20 years ago. So there you go. Same thing.
Tommy, have you seen Casablanca?
I've seen it a long, long time ago. I think it was shown to me.
That's another one that we should cover. We should do Casablanca, Key Largo, the Maltese Falcon. There's just a tremendous number of.
Those are all various desserts, right? Like Key Largo pie. No, I'm not kidding. Sorry, but
Well.
Lou, going back to your point though about rediscovering older media or older entertainment, that's already happening in the comic book industry. While there's some out there who would claim that there's nothing wrong with the American comic book industry at this time and everything is fine and it's great and it's never been better, most other people realize that it basically has gone down the crapper essentially. And what I've been hearing is that many comic book stores are selling way more in back issues of older comics these days than they are of the newer stuff, which is a complete reversal of when I was into collecting and whatnot. So and even speaking anecdotally to sellers in my area, they saying the same thing. Like when I mentioned to somebody that I had, I don't know, something like 20 long boxes of comics from like dating back to like the 80s, they were like, here's my card, call me, So
I have some too.
Yeah. So
and I might mention, by the way, for those who don't understand, who don't have the history, the reason why all of these really classic comics, Detective Number whatever that Batman was first in, or Action this, the reason why these things sell for millions of dollars or thereabouts is because during World War II there were paper drives where all this stuff was mulched and reused to build shells and bombs and things. Same thing with the movies, all the nitrate stock. Well, nitrate is the same root as nitroglycerin, which is explosive. And my mother told me she had movie magazines, stacks of them in her garage, but for the war effort, you gave it up. That's why there's so few of the originals. When you talk about redoing back issues recently, Tommy, why don't they reprint all those classic DC and Marvel comics from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s?
They're starting to, yeah.
They should.
Yeah, that's one of the things that for people that want to see the original origins of these characters, the publishers now print all of these in various different formats. So you can get them in these great big omnibus editions. You can get them in oversized formats. You can get them in a traditional softcover trade paperback. It actually, they've got editions for any price point that you want to pay. And so I think that's what's keeping the comic industry just barely going now, is people buying the omnibuses.
And maybe people would be more interested if they didn't do things like the Avengers phase finale and kill everybody off. But that's another subject.
But Lou, going back to what you were saying though about the nitrates and whatnot, are you saying that there were movies that really ended up being bombs?
Oh yeah, and bombs that were bombs. But a lot of them, if you go to any of the old movie lots, Universal, Warner Brothers, Paramount, you will find, because they're still there, the film vault buildings, and they look like blockhouses from World War I, because they stored this stuff and it could spontaneously catch fire and explode. And if it didn't, it went to powder eventually if they didn't copy it and restore it. When folks see these things, the newly restored edition of whatever movie, that's why. Because all of the old film literally is crumbling and disappearing if it wasn't recycled for that. Because nobody knew from reruns. Nobody knew from recycling. It was show it, do it, it's over, next.
Until home video recording became a thing, the idea that any of this was going to be valuable outside of its original time at the box office, it wasn't a thought that occurred to them. It's only when you started getting the ability to play them at home that they started thinking, we need to preserve this stuff, and they started storing a lot of the original prints in salt mines to slow down the chemical degradation process.
But the first guy that did it, as far as television was concerned, was Desi. when Desi Arnaz invented multi-camera film, and thank God he did, because I did a lot of those. He went to them at that time. Everything was going out live, or they had what was called kinescope, which was basically a 16 millimeter camera aiming at a little black and white cathode ray tube and sort of making a recording, but not a audience ready recording of the show. And he said, well, what if I shot it on film with 3 cameras? And they said, why? He said, well, if I pay the money to do it, can I own the movie? Sure, we don't care, as long as it gets out on time. That's why he made his millions on the reruns of I Love Lucy and everything else that they did after that. And
Wow.
then eventually became 4 cameras, and that's a whole other subject that we're not into tonight. But they didn't care. They didn't know.
Yeah. Well, it's always those things which don't seem to have value that end up becoming very valuable in the future. Well, and hopefully maybe, 100 years from now, someone might find these conversations valuable. You never know.
Oh, dear God.
Well, on that note, though, I know that we have our real world lives to get off to. And I think, we've said what we need to say. Go see The Sting. We've gone 46 minutes without spoiling the ending, which I'm really, really happy about. It is just a fun movie. Like, it'll put you, like, it's really true. Like, they really nailed that tagline. It'll put you in a good mood when you watch it.
And by the way, about that Sting ending, which I will not reveal, how many times do you get totally fooled by people smarter than you are and not feel angry and resentful, but feel thrilled to have it happen? That's a rare trick to pull off, to make you happy to be suckered.
All right, let's not get into into discussion about politics now, Lou. Please.
Oh, well, I meant movies. I mean, there's movies where there are lots of movies I watch where I say, "This is what you were leading up to. This is the big finish, folks. Give me a break. I just wasted an hour and a half of my life watching this."
Yeah,
I get an itchy butt sooner than that nowadays. I vote with my feet and get up and go.
On that note, Lorn, apparently it was what was it today or yesterday was the anniversary of The Last Jedi, and I don't know about you, but my feed was exploding with people saying it was the best thing and the movie was fantastic and had best fights ever. And
yeah, okay, sure.
By the way,
I question your taste, but okay.
By the way, you notice this movie has fights. This movie has special effects. This movie has matte shots and technical stuff. None of us have mentioned any of them about being highlights of why you should watch the movie. Nowadays, everything is, go see it for the CGI. Oh, man,
right.
We didn't know, we didn't care. In fact, I've always said that as successful as Jaws was, the biggest mistake they made, and I know the guy who was the PR boss at Universal at that time who agreed with me, was when they were worried the movie wouldn't make it, so they did all these stories about this wonderfully realistic-looking mechanical shark. Imagine if you went into that movie and had no idea that wasn't a real shark. What a bigger impact it would have made. This fixation on the technical side is not a good thing for drama and not a good thing for audiences' taste and enjoyment.
No arguments there.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, guys, I want to thank you for another wonderful conversation on the genre, guys. Lorn,
I think we're going to have to start another series called The Classic Guys on these individual movies separate from their genres that Lorn brought up and that we all love. Because there's an audience out there that's starving for good entertainment, and they certainly aren't going to get it in the theaters for the next year or so. And a lot of the TV stuff ain't so hot either. Imagine for a moment if Disney Plus ran The Sting. They'd get an audience. They'd get an audience.
I will say, sorry, go on, Luke. Sorry.
And you can rent it on Amazon for what, like $3-4?
For me, it was free up in Canada. I didn't have to pay for that. Yeah, it was included with my Prime membership.
Well, so there you go. And I think The Sting is free, and The Sting 2 is like $3 or something. Folks, in these troubled economic times, get the family together and make your own damn popcorn and watch one of these.
Yeah, seriously.
Watch one of these. The family will not resent you for making, that old movie. We don't watch an old movie. Oh, yeah? Well, see what you think.
Well, guys, leave your comments down below. Let us know what you think. Did you enjoy this conversation? Give us your feedback down below. Leave your comments. We'd love to hear them, as well as what you'd like to see us cover next. We have a couple of ideas, and I think our next conversation is going to be...
Teaser.
All right,
Yippee.
we're going to be talking about the
Teaser.
quintessential...
Wait. All I'm going to say is this, and people will get it. Watch.
All right.
Yippee-ki-yay. That's all I'm going to say. And Christmas. Yippee-ki-yay.
Ho, 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 yes. All right.
Oh, I have a machine gun.
On that note, gentlemen, I will bid you adieu until next time. Audience members, like I said, let us know your thoughts. Give us your comments. We'd love to read them. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend or week or whatever it is for whenever this thing plays. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on T3PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it, and if you want to enjoy episodes of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WDW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing topic? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for joining us here on T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.